Good evening, everyone. My name is Zelene McKinney-Roy Campbell, and I'm a member of the Pan-African Congress North American Delegation. And we would like to welcome you to our webinar on the dangers of ADOS and how ADOS movement promotes anti-Blackness, online violence, and voter suppression. Our presenter is Jessica Ann Mitchell Aiwuyor. She will provide an in-depth overview of how the American Descendants of Slavery, ADOS movement, is harmful to the Black community by promoting divisive anti-Black rhetoric, white supremacy, online violence against the Black community, and voter suppression. Jessica Ann Mitchell Aiwuyor serves as the Communications Chair for the Pan-African Congress North American Delegation. She is an author, cultural storyteller, and communications specialist. Jessica is also a wife and mother to twin girls. She is a member of the Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C. She is the founder of Our Legacy Press and National Black Culture Information Trust. Her writings about African American cultural heritage and ethnicity have been published and cited across a wide range of publications, including Huffington Post, The Business Insider, MSNBC, La Progressive, and TV's One's News One Now. She has a bachelor's degree in African World Studies from Fort Valley State University, a master's of arts in Pan-African Studies from the African Studies Department of Syracuse University, and a master's of science from the Newhouse School of Public Communications, also of Syracuse University. She is a reparations advocate and the proud descendant of Africans enslaved and marooned in Georgia and South Carolina. And she is the great-granddaughter of Bishop Benjamin Jones Sr., who was born during slavery and lived in Augusta, Georgia. Her matrilineal heritage is from the Tikar ethnic group located in modern-day Cameroon. I'll give you now our presenter, Jessica.
So thank you everyone for joining me today. Like was said earlier, my name is Jessica Ann Mitchell Aiwuyor. I'm a descendant of Africans that were enslaved in Georgia and South Carolina. I'm the little girl in the picture there. We're standing there outside of Ward Chapel, AME in Augusta, Georgia. I'm standing there with my mom, my grandmom, and my great-grandmama, Flossie Wilder. Flossie had a very interesting life. And one of the things I learned early in my childhood is that she escaped from a plantation with my great-grandfather. They were actually sharecroppers and had to run for their lives in the middle of the night. And they relocated to Augusta, Georgia. And that is where they were able to build up a life for themselves and raise a family. So the issue of reparations is very important to me on a personal level. I am a reparationist. I support reparations. So this conversation has absolutely nothing to do with arguing for or against reparations. Pretty much everyone on this call is an advocate for reparations. Yes, someone must pay. So let's get that out of the way now. This is not about who should get reparations. We already know it's descendants of Africans that were enslaved in the United States. This is not about arguing the racial wealth gap. We already know there's a racial wealth gap that needs to be fixed. So that is not what this conversation is about. What we'll cover though, we'll do an overview of the ADOS movement. We'll talk about roots of the movement, how ADOS is anti-immigrant, how ADOS suppresses Black votes, how ADOS is anti-Black, how ADOS is used for manipulation, how ADOS engages in online violence, and the overall effects of the ADOS ideology on our communities. So back at the end of 2019, I started witnessing some pretty interesting stuff on my timeline. Most of it was very divisive and hateful in nature, and a lot of it was attached to a particular hashtag. And I felt really bad for being late on this, so I spent months and months researching what this hashtag was about, what the people behind it were about, what the organization was about. And in January, I published a report titled Understanding ADOS, the movement to hijack Black identity and weaken Black unity in America. And I'm happy to say that it has been downloaded over 50,000 times by people across the Pan-African world, and it has had a good reception, which means that this has been a conversation that is long overdue, which is partly why I'm hosting this webinar tonight, because I keep getting follow-up questions. There are people that might need more additional information about ADOS, and there's just more research to be shared. To be honest, I didn't even put everything I had into this report, and it still was a great deal of information. So overview, the term American Descendants of Slavery was created in 2016 to describe and distinctly separate Black Americans or African Americans from Black immigrant communities. This includes Africans, Afro-Cubans, Afro-Latinos, etc. And it's a self-proclaimed lineage-based movement that advocates, that claims to advocate for reparations on behalf of Black Americans. From the beginning, ADOS represents some problems. First of all, using American Descendants of Slavery is dehumanizing language because it omits peoplehood. Longtime reparationists have been using another term that is much more effective and not dehumanizing, which is descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States. Because one of the core issues raised in reparations is that it goes beyond a cash payout. This is about our humanity. This is about our peoplehood. And American Descendants of Slavery de-emphasizes our peoplehood and instead says that our lineage is an institution. It's the institution of slavery, but you cannot be a progeny of the institution. You're a progeny of the people. So we are descendants of Africans that were enslaved in the United States. Another problem with ADOS is it distances African heritage and our lineage. If you're going to advocate for reparations, you have to get to the core issue. And the core issue at hand is I'm Black, I am an African person or a person of African descent, and I'm not in Africa. As a person, I am here in the United States of America. So I have to make that connection. And the 1619 marker in Georgetown, in Jamestown, does that for us as well by talking about the first Africans that reached these shores. And that is where we have to begin from, the fact that we were African people taken away from the continent. So going further in looking at some of the rhetoric of ADOS leaders minimize Blackness and emphasize whiteness. Here are a couple of quotes. You have more in common being an African American, 400 years in America, never been to Africa, with someone white, and you may even look more like the white person. This came from Antonio Moore, ADOS co-founder. And how about this quote? You have to become white though, and whiteness is normalization. It's only us that are stuck at the bottom. Remember the Texaco article that said we were stuck at the bottom like little black jelly beans? It was awful, but it was right. That was a quote directly from Yvette Carnell, another ADOS co-founder. Again, ADOS leaders de-emphasize Africa and re-emphasize American slavery as our lineage, which again is just a concept that does not make sense if you're advocating for reparations, because the whole point is that we were taken from our homeland and brought here to work in slave labor. So you have to start at the beginning, and the beginning happens on the continent. And so ADOS leaders have been telling their followers to actually distance themselves from Africa, stop trying to trace your origins to Africa, and instead trace it to American slavery. And one thing, let's be correct here. yes, America owes a debt to us, but we cannot get that debt by erasing our history and distancing ourselves from it. Another thing that I will go into more is that ADOS leaders have told their followers to withhold their votes unless a Democratic nominee outlines a specific economic plan for ADOS. And this is from the New York Times article by Farrah Stockman when she attended the ADOS conference that was last year. ADOS frequently attacks Black culture and African heritage. So if you go to the YouTube channel of the ADOS co-founders, you'll frequently see videos that negatively depict Black culture. At one point, Yvette Carnell even said there was no such thing as Black culture. She's here saying that Pan-Africanism is dead, when everyone else was getting ready and attending the Year of Return in Ghana. She was busy calling it a finesse and critiquing hotel rooms. And none of this actually gets us reparations. All it does is cause divisiveness. So the roots of the movement. The ADOS movement was founded in 2016 by Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore. And they have a thriving YouTube and Twitter following. Moore is a lawyer, and Carnell served as a congressional aide before gaining popularity on Boyce Watkins' YourBlackWorld.net. And Moore also authored several articles on Newsmax, a right-wing leaning news site. But one of the most interesting and concerning aspects of the roots of the ADOS movement is the fact that Carnell was on the board of Progressives for Immigration Reform, which is a known front group that co-ops movements. And she admits to this, and she makes this explanation that she joined the Progressives for Immigration Reform to let everyone know that citizenship matters and that this is our justice claim, and that we African Americans should be the priority minority above all other people of color. And then she tries to say that it is essentially progressive in nature. And so we'll go into that. What Progressives for Immigration Reform is an organization that's a part of the Tanton Network. And let me explain what this is. Years ago, and he just recently passed away, John Tanton, a white supremacist and a eugenicist, had this idea, and let me backtrack a little bit. He became increasingly concerned that America was becoming more and more Black and brown. So him being a white supremacist and a strategist, he came up with this really smart idea to create organizations that on the surface appear to be progressive. They appear to be progressive. They appear to be completely harmless. But their ultimate goal would be to limit Black and brown immigration and to keep America white. And the names of these organizations are the Federation for American Immigration Reform, FAIR, or Progressives for Immigration Reform, or the Center for Immigration Studies, and Numbers USA. Some of these organizations are offshoots from each one another, but these are all a part of the Tanton, of what we would call the Tanton Network, and this has been tracked extensively by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So let's look at some famous Tanton quotes. I've come to the point of view that for European American society and culture to persist requires a European American majority, and a clear one at that. As whites see their power and control over their lives declining, will they simply go into the night, or will there be an explosion? Demography is destiny. We decline to bequeath to our children minority status in their own land. This is the man that is the brain behind Progressives for Immigration Reform. This is the root of that organization. And organizations are part of the Tanton Network. So there have been organizations that have looked into these front groups, and they call them what they are, an anti-immigration lobby. So in this article, I believe this was on Daily Kos, we hear more about how FAIR, which is the Federation for Americans for Immigration Reform, how they went and founded Progressives for Immigration Reform, which is another kind of AstroTurf organization, again, a front organization. And so let's compare this to ADOS characteristics. ADOS characteristics are very nativist. They emphasize American identity, distance Black Americans from African heritage or identity, use colors of American flag in its logo, and continually blames economic issues and unemployment rates on immigrants, but more specifically, immigrants of color. They also promote divisions among communities of African descent. So what you'll see is ADOS leaders will say that they are very adamant about reparations, but will spend a large amount of time critiquing movies that have African lead actors or Black British actors. And none of that gets us closer to reparations, but it does help to promote a divide among communities of African descent. And to see this even more, what happens with ADOS is they will take the words of historical Black figures and twist them, or try to assume some kind of oneness with a Black historical figure that has passed and use it to their benefit for their campaign. So in a recent video, Antonio Moore said, you're gonna have to stand up. You're going to have to stand up for more than reparations. You're going to have to deal with how immigration is averse in many spaces with this whole push for reparations. You're going to have to deal with how Dr. King might not have seen this because he was talking about equality. He was talking about a time before he understood immigration, because they hadn't really immigrated that many Black immigrants. So here, Antonio Moore is trying to assume that Dr. King would have been anti-immigrant had he been in this era, which of course many of us know, based on the politics of Dr. King and the spirit of Dr. King, that just is not true. So let's think about ADOS. We talked about those characteristics of nativism and clinging to American citizenship and using anti-immigrant talking points to emphasize the necessity of looking at Black unemployment rates and to blame actually Black unemployment rates or the economic issues of our day on too much immigration. But the thing is, this has been done before. And actually, the groups that are a part of the Tanton Network were involved before. The Federation for American Immigration Reform created a group very similar to ADOS in 2006 that was called Choose Black America. And on the website for Choose Black America, it's not up anymore if you go, but I was able to do some research and get some screen grabs from when the website used to be up. But it states, mass illegal immigration has been the single greatest impediment to Black advancement in this country over the past 25 years. So just think about that. Not mass incarceration, not structural racism, but illegal immigration. And here you see an activist yelling at immigrants, the American flag in the background. And so they were using Black people in this front group for their anti-immigration role. So let's look at it. So we have ADOS, where we have a co-founder that was on the board for Progressives for Immigration Reform. And the excuse is that she wanted to advocate for African Americans economically. And another excuse is she says she didn't get paid. So we have ADOS, which is very similar, someone that's connected to or was on the board of an organization that is part of the Tanton Network. There's ADOS. And then we have Choose Black America, which is very similar, that predated ADOS. Again, the organization argued that Black Americans had been severely damaged by decades of uncontrolled illegal immigration and stand to lose more if illegal aliens are granted amnesty. And this is a screenshot from the website. It sounds very familiar. And this organization included Dr. Claude Anderson, whose work is often used by ADOS members because it is very similar in terms of looking at the economics concerning reparations and the overall economic state of the Black community. But then there's a third group that is associated with the Tanton Network, a third Black front group that was called Blacks for Equal Rights Coalition. And this was back in 2011. And again, this group talked about the lack of Black jobs, made the economic situation the focus. Whole time, it was a project of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. So that's three groups associated in some type of way. Have Yvette Carnell that was on the board of Progressives for Immigration Reform that now runs ADOS. Then we have Choose Black America, and that was run by a member of the Tanton Network. And now we have Blacks for Equal Rights Coalition. So we can say, you know, this is all just a coincidence. You're just pulling this out of nowhere. So let's just keep looking further. Again, FAIR is retweeted on the page of this fake organization or their project. And you can see how they use these Black activists to go out and confront Latino construction workers. But then there's a fourth group that's also very similar called the Black American Leadership Alliance. And this one is funded by the Center for Immigration Studies. And very recently, so first let me back up. That's four of these types of groups that are telling Black people that economically we are losing to immigrants and we must do something to stop immigrants. That's four that are connected to some type of organization in the Tanton Network. And thankfully, the Black Institute last year wrote a brief article warning people to beware of the Black American Leadership Alliance for this very reason. And in their article, they wrote, today, a Black rogue right-wing front, the Black American Leadership Alliance, is misrepresenting what comprehensive immigration reform means to the Black community. Today's march, however, is not about immigration, it's about partisan politics, another strategic and calculated attempt by the Tea Party to attack the Black voting power. Don't be duped by this blatant endeavor to blur the issues. There is solid support among African-American voters for immigration reform. Most do not agree with the assertion that immigrants are taking away jobs from African-Americans. However, the attitudes towards immigrants are mostly positive. The fear of the Black vote is real and has been made evident by the Senate's attempt to eliminate the diversity visa program, the Supreme Court's recent decision on voting rights, and now this sorry Black front. So the Black Institute put out a warning about this organization last year, which is a product of the Tanton Network. So let's look. 4 Black economic groups affiliated with white nationalist and eugenicist-supported organizations. Let's look at the timeline. Choose Black America, affiliated with the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Blacks for Equal Rights Coalition, affiliated with the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Black American Leadership Conference, affiliated with the Center for Immigration Studies, and American Descendants of Slavery, that just happened to have a co-founder on the board of Progressives for Immigration Reform. And look, Trump is even saying the same things as these organizations, claiming that Black Americans are most hurt by illegal immigration. And it is not something that is a coincidence. And we have to ask ourselves, why would Trump be pushing this? And ADOS leaders in their Black agenda are very specific to say that they not only want reparations, but a part of their agenda for Black America is to limit the H-1B visa program. So less Black immigrants can come in, or less brown immigrants can come in and get tech jobs. And it was very interesting to me, why the focus on something so specific, H-1B visa program and tech, the field of tech? Well, right now there's an organization called U.S. Tech Workers that has been advocating for a while for Congress to reform the H-1B program. And look, Donald Trump signed an order to limit this program. But guess who's behind U.S. Tech Workers? Progressives for Immigration Reform. It's actually a project of theirs. And guess who is sharing their articles on Twitter? Antonio Moore, who is an ADOS co-founder. So why are anti-immigration, right-wing, white nationalist supported groups obsessed with getting Black buy-in? Is it because they love us? Is it because they care about us? Do they genuinely care about Black jobs? Do they genuinely care about Black unemployment rates? These are people that, this is a network that derived from a man that feared the rise of the Black and brown population. So why are they obsessed with getting us to buy into it? And why do they keep creating these pop-up organizations to get us to buy into it? So essentially, this is all to prevent the browning of America. And what has happened is, analysts have said that by 2040, America is going to become a majority people of color country. And this scares the mess out of white nationalists, absolutely terrifies them that they would become a minority within the United States of America. And so Trump has been doing everything in his power to limit immigration access to Black and brown populations. And there are reports out now, and this one is from the Washington Post, showing that everything that Trump is doing to limit immigration has been effective, and that that he has been helpful in this push by white nationalists to keep America majority white up to the next 5 years. He's been able to actually slow down the browning of America, which is exactly what they've been trying to do. So why does this matter? Why is all of this mixed up in reparations? Well, like Abram Paulo said from the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, a crucial way to expand on power is bridging the gap between the immigrant communities, the Black immigrant communities, and the non-immigrant Black communities. Bridging the gap is very essential for us to expand our power. And white nationalists know this, which is why they don't want to be a minority within the United States of America. And they keep pushing for locking Black and brown immigrants out. And this is from an old playbook, like Alan Jenkins said in his report, Bridging the Black Immigrant Divide, where he said, the conversation is often framed in terms of competition and conflict. And that framing was no accident. The mainstream media have fixated on potential points of Black immigrant tension, looking for a conflict storyline, and that storyline has been amply fed by conservative anti-immigrant groups intent on driving a wedge between the two communities. So what do we get from this? What do we get from attaching anti-immigrant policies to reparations and sowing divisions among the African diaspora? Well, it results in a number of things to us, and it's not reparations. It results in a weakened growth of the Black population, because currently, if you look across the board, the birth rates for Native populations are lower, especially in the Western world. And the way in which the population increases is usually through immigrants that have a higher birth rate. So what we get is, when we have an influx of other Black immigrants, we get a rise in the Black birth rate. We get an increase in the Black population. As their descendants continue on, they possibly merge within the overall Black community, and then it helps to build a power base. It helps to boost the overall population. And this has happened numerous times throughout the history of Black America, with different influxes of Black populations. But when we attach anti-immigration policies to reparations, it doesn't bring us closer to reparations. It actually weakens our strength. And so we also get a weakened understanding of global Black oppression and systemic racism. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times these conversations are really happen from a lens of just only within America. And I'll get to this more later. But the problem with that is the economic issues that we face are an indicator of things that are happening globally to people of African descent. So we would actually benefit from having a global understanding of systemic racism and oppression. And so this also divides and weakens the Pan-African coalition. As I mentioned earlier, it harms coalition building when we get into these arguments and bolster them unnecessarily. There are going to be differences. There are going to be cultural clashes. That is only natural for human beings to have those types of things. But when we stoke the flames and we make them a priority over making the collective and making unifying the priority, it just weakens our overall coalition building. It also weakens the Black vote, because we get fewer Black voters. And ADOS, as I mentioned earlier, co-founders are telling people to vote down ballot, which is something I'll get into more in this presentation. But voting down ballot actually would have an adverse effect and not help the reparations cause at all. And I get that people are saying that it'll show the Democrats, if they don't put reparations up, then we're going to show them. It doesn't show them anything other than you didn't vote. Increased surveillance and criminalization. So I will talk about this a little bit more. So I just wanted to show you, these are the things that result in attaching anti-immigrant policies to reparations. So the ADOS appeal is isolationism. We don't need Pan-Africanism, and we need to be anti-immigrant. We're for reparations, for closing the racial wealth gap. We want to gain full citizenship in America and get respect as a specific ethnic group. This is the ADOS appeal. The reality is structural racism. Even if we got rid of every immigrant in America, we still, as Black people, be overworked and underpaid. We still have low wage labor. There would still be redlining. There would be imperialism, capitalism, neocolonialism, mass incarceration, all of these things that existed before the influx of immigrants in the United States of America and before the influx of Black immigrants. So this appeal to isolationism actually is more harmful than good. I actually call it the fenced mentality, because it is like racist and structural racism and white nationalists are literally fencing in Black communities. And the ADOS strategy is, let's help them build the fence. And that's just going to harm our communities even more. We shouldn't be trying to help them build the fence. We should be trying to tear the fence down. So as I mentioned earlier, the hyper focus on anti-immigration policies against Black immigrants results in increased criminalization of the Black American community. How so? because none of us are walking around with descendant of slave on our forehead. It's not like stamped anywhere, and nobody else is walking around with I'm a Black immigrant on my forehead. We already are under state surveillance. Black bodies are already criminalized in this country. So when we put increased scrutiny, especially when we direct it towards other Black people, we end up having our own selves criminalized in the process. It's like we're trying to point other people out, and we end up getting the blunt end of the stick. You really are putting yourself in a bad situation here. And I'm just sharing this screenshot for people that are on a call and can't see the visual, but ICE is already targeting Black Americans. ICE is already detaining Black Americans. Black Americans are telling ICE, I live here, I'm from this country, and ICE is not believing them. It just recriminalizes all of us. In a recent case, a Black U.S. Democrat, a Black U.S. diplomat was detained by Customs and Border Patrol, and she was a diplomat. She had all her stamps, all her paperwork. They didn't care, and they're not gonna care. If we keep stressing this anti-immigrant point, it's just going to land back on our feet because we're already criminalized in this country, and none of us have this stamp on our head to say that's an immigrant, that's not an immigrant. We're all going to face the negative repercussions of demonizing immigrants, of dividing the Black community. And essentially this turns into an ethnicity witch hunt. And I really want to know how that equals reparations. And for people that can't see this, I put up screenshots of tweets because not even ADOS members can differentiate between any of us. So it literally leads us on this goose hunt of trying to figure out, are you an immigrant? Are you not an immigrant? We're supposed to be advocating for reparations. So in one tweet, this person says, and this is them critiquing one of my YouTube interviews about ADOS, African immigrant Jessica Aiwuyor tries to redefine the identity of descendants of American slaves by erasing our unique lineage. I'm not an immigrant. She is an immigrant grifter claiming African American and slavery, but from elsewhere in the diaspora. She don't have these experiences below, so how can she discuss what our experiences are? We are the Black community. She wants to ride ADOS backs. I'm reading it now. It's straight garbage. Is she even ADOS? In her article, she claims a legacy of slavery with the name Aiwuyor. She must clarify her lineage. Did she marry or is an immigrant first generation, second generation? Here's another rebuttal here. So basically, these are just different people speculating about what my ethnicity truly is. And as I said before in the beginning of this webinar, I am Black American, African American, from Georgia and South Carolina. But that should not matter, and we should not go into turning reparations into a witch hunt against each other according to who has which last name. This is super, super unproductive, and it does not help us whatsoever, and it's actually what white supremacists and white nationalists want. While we're arguing over who has which last name and who can speak on what, we are being fenced in, like I said, and ADOS is telling people to help us build the fence. So again, I want to reemphasize that there were, for people that may have forgotten already, or for people that just got on the line, there are 4 Black economic groups affiliated with white nationalists and eugenicist supported organizations that were basically the brainchild of a white supremacist named John Tanton. And those organizations, again, are Choose Black America, affiliated with Federation for American Immigration Reform. Blacks for Equal Rights Coalition, affiliated again with the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Black American Leadership Conference, the Center for Immigration Studies, and American Descendants of Slavery just so happens to have a co-founder that was on the board. And the excuse is, well, we didn't get paid. But let me point something else out for you. Of all these groups, ADOS has been the most successful in in really penetrating and gaining popularity among the Black community, and that's for a number of reasons. But the first three groups are directly projects of these organizations. They are directly projects of Federation for American Immigration Reform. So when Black people hear about that, learn about that, they instantly usually want to distance themselves. They can usually just get a few talking heads to come on board, but not really get a massive push behind the Black population. And it makes things difficult when you are an official organization. But when you're not an official organization, when you're a lineage, it's harder to track anything. It's harder to track how you make money. It's harder to track, it's harder to track so many different things. When you're an LLC, or you just have a trademark that's for t-shirts, it just makes it harder to track what money is behind what. And it's actually very smart to not, if you wanted to do something like this, let's say it's true that this was intentional. If you wanted to do something like this, it would be very smart not to be an official organization, because then you can just claim it's a lineage and get a big movement behind you and not have many people digging into the economics of it. And another thing is, a lot of ADOS members, as they continue on, they often ask, why don't we create this group? Why don't we create this PAC? And there are all these different reasons that are tossed out, and they're told that it's not necessary, it doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. But if you create these official organizations with official registration and all types of things, you have to show documentation, you have to show who's paying you. You have to show that. So it's smarter to not have to deal with all of those things. How ADOS suppresses the Black vote. There are a number of slogans that ADOS leaders have been sharing for a long time. One of them is cut the check, tangibles 2020, no Black agenda, no vote, and vote down ballot. And so part of the logic they say behind that is, if these Democrats don't put reparations on the table, we're just gonna vote down ballot. And then they tell people that they're not telling people to not vote. They're saying, oh, we're just saying vote down ballot. The problem with that is, when you tell people to vote down ballot, and you tell them that we're just not gonna be a part of the presidential election, you're telling people not to vote in the presidential election. You can't have it both ways. You can't say we're telling people to vote but not vote in the presidential election. You're telling people to not vote. And at a time when voter suppression tactics are at an all-time high, this is not an approach that gets you closer to reparations. We already have the Voting Rights Act gutted, COVID-19 and absentee ballots are at risk, poll taxes, polling stations in Black neighborhoods shut down, limited voting, millions of voters removed from the rolls, but your strategy is to vote down ballot. That's even if we can vote. We're getting shut out from being able to even vote. And the strategy here is that we'll show them by not voting. We should be, if the strategy is to get reparations passed and get Congress fully on board, then you would not be advocating a strategy that suppresses the vote, regardless if it's presidential or not, because members of Congress are going to need substantial support to get something like reparations passed. So if you were truly, truly trying to get reparations passed, you would do more. And if you were trying to get it passed through Congress, you definitely wouldn't be telling people, we're going to show those Democrats by not voting, when we already are struggling to even get in the booth. It makes no sense. It absolutely makes no sense. It's one thing to say, I don't vote because I don't believe in voting. I don't believe in this system. There are people that say that is their prerogative. But it's another thing to say, we're not going to vote as a strategy to get reparations passed through Congress. That's just disingenuous. That's not how this works. Another issue is making reparations the only issue on the table. And right now, the Federal Fair Housing Act is being stripped from the inside. And this is an act that was passed literally 7 days after Martin Luther King was assassinated. It was passed in his honor because it was one of the things he was advocating for before he died, right before he died. Open housing is what they called it back then. And so Lyndon B. Johnson really pushed to get this passed. And right now, the Trump administration is doing everything in its power with Ben Carson at the head of HUD to strip the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which would aid in people being able to discriminate against Black American communities and aid in housing discrimination. And right now, we're dealing with COVID-19, where we already know there's going to be increased housing discrimination and increased homelessness among possibly millions of Black Americans. So what is at risk is very important. You have to be very careful when you're saying that we're going to withhold in the presidential election. That doesn't matter anyway, because Trump has the ability to place people within these departments that do things to harm the rules and the laws that were put in place and actually fought for. Martin Luther King died and fighting for this. And so right now, all of this is at risk. And I know this personally because I was the Associate Director of Communications at the National Fair Housing Alliance. I was there when Trump started attacking the Fair Housing Act from the beginning, from the inside out. And we've been ringing the alarm ever since. This is something that is going to cause harm to our communities. It's already causing harm. They're already trying to reinstitute segregation, and they're not hiding it. Trump was on Twitter just a couple months ago saying, at the request of many great Americans who live in the suburbs and others, I'm studying the AFFH housing regulation that is having a devastating impact on these once thriving suburban areas. Corrupt Joe Biden wants to make them worse, not fair to homeowners. I may end. So this suburban is obviously a word that he really is using in exchange for white. And what AFFH does is it helps Black Americans be able to access housing free from discrimination. And the Trump administration is actively working to get rid of the AFFH rule, which would make it a free-for-all for realtors, real estate developers, and anyone that has studied the history of housing in America. You know that the United States is the reason why we have had issues with housing from the very beginning. Our own government blocked us from getting housing. I'm going to just check the time. And PIFRA is celebrating all of this. They're celebrating all of this. They're celebrating ADOS helping them in their campaign and helping them disenfranchise the Black vote. They say in a recent newsletter, which was last year, the ranks of the disfranchised are large and growing each year. In the last 3 years, the American Descendants of Slaves, or ADOS movement, a movement that understands the impact unbridled immigration has had on our country's most vulnerable workers, has grown to a size where it has real political clout. Given that if less than 90% of Black voters who vote do not vote for a Democratic presidential candidate, the Republican candidate will win. Add this to the growth of Black conservative groups such as Urban Game Changers that have coalesced around the topic of immigration, and it is conceivable that the White House will be out of reach of any political party that does not prioritize restricting immigration. So they celebrate ADOS right here, openly. So the question that many people have is, why co-op reparations? Why? And from a communications standpoint, this is why. Because it's a hot topic, it's controversial, so media will easily pick it up. It's a cultural discussion, so it's easy to become a part of. We have social media infiltration and manipulation. It's very easy to manipulate online right now. We're in the era of the hashtag, so people see hashtags and they follow them. And so it's very easy to kind of get people that tag along. And it's an easy Trojan horse tool because many of us are still trying to figure out reparations for ourselves. There are a lot of different celebrities, there are a lot of different groups that are advocating for reparations in different ways. So it's easy for a group to pop up and then add something in like anti-immigration legislation and voter suppression. And what you also have to do when you are co-opting a movement such as a reparations movement, you have to delegitimize these organizations. You have to make false claims against NCOBRA, which is the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And you have to make false claims against the National African American Reparations Commission so that Black folks won't go to those leading reparations groups anymore. So what has happened is ADOS leaders have started calling these groups incompetent. They say they've done nothing, that they're trying to give our money to immigrants, that they're immigrants, that they're enemies, that they're grifters. And so I just have a tweet here on the side where Antonio Moore is tweeting about NCOBRA. Reparations was always going to have to challenge the horrible politics that allowed Black descendants of American slavery to be shut out of their own country. No, we won't be called a kata, and no, we won't allow NCOBRA or anyone to give ADOS reparations to anyone but ADOS. So they're creating this atmosphere in which NCOBRA or NARC is the problem. So what has happened here? There has been the promotion of the false idea that anti-ADOS is anti-reparations, because the hashtag has been utilized so much online and boosted online by different echo chambers. There are people that follow it and believe that if you don't support ADOS, you don't support reparations, which is far from the case. The false idea that ADOS is a lineage, the false idea that everyone is against you, it's us against them, and the constant attack on Pan-Africanism by promoting the false idea of erasure or flat Blackness. But our ancestors told us about the necessity of Pan-Africanism. Malcolm X even told us you can't understand what's going on in Mississippi if you don't understand what's going on in the Congo. And you can't really be interested in what's going on in Mississippi if you're not also interested in what's going on in the Congo. They're both the same interests are at stake, the same sides are drawn up, the same schemes are at work in the Congo that are at work in Mississippi. So here, Malcolm X is emphasizing the understanding, the need to understand the way in which oppression has, the way in which global oppression has affected all people of African descent around the world, and that in order to truly understand what's happening to us, we can't look at it through a framework of just borders or a country. We really have to look at it from a global framework. What's the role of media in all this? Because there's been a lot of different media articles about ADOS. Well, as media does, it sensationalizes reparations. There's often the absence of thorough investigations. There's an absence of in-depth independent investigations. There's a general lack of care concerning the impact on our communities. And there's a lack of research. There's just not enough background research being had. So they'll write they will write an article, but they'll not mention the ties, the concerning ties that ADOS leaders have, or the connections that they have, and they won't do thorough research themselves into the organizations and the affiliations and the other issues that I'm going to talk about next. And I'm going to try to hurry up because I'm very cognizant of time. So if you hop off, I will have a video that we can share for others. But if you want to stay on, I might be able to answer a few questions soon. But I'm going to try to get through this because it really is a lot of information here. So recently also, as ADOS gets more media attention, they have had more attempts to sanitize ADOS history. So if you go to the Wikipedia page, it really doesn't show you the full scope of the group. And there's been a battle between Wikipedia editors and ADOS members over the Wikipedia page because ADOS members keep trying to delete issues concerning controversy and xenophobia from the page. So if you go to Wikipedia now, you'll see at the top that the neutrality of that Wikipedia article is being disputed. Even recently, Yvette Carnell blamed Somali immigrants for the death of George Floyd. So this hatred, again, of immigrants runs deep. And she said, you have to talk about what he didn't have, why he didn't have it. You have to talk about Somalis being placed in and the refugees being placed there, and they're being resettled with money and he not having it. You have to talk about the generational wealth that we're missing, because that is what defines him even being there in the moment where he was killed by police. So again, somehow Somali immigrants are responsible for the death of George Floyd. This is just really a tragic take. Another core issue, and this is very key to the ADOS movement, is that there's a lot of online manipulation and vulnerability. There's a lot of disinformation, bots and digital blackface. There are 4chan groups, and there's fanaticism. So I'm going to try to get through this part quickly, but there have been reports of fake accounts. So last year, J.A.M. Mitchell, who is the head of Stop Online Violence Against Women, wrote a report. And her report talked about disinformation campaigns targeting Black communities. And at the top of that list was American Descendants of Slaves. And she talked about the list of issues that would be targeted, and reparations is at the top of that issue and immigration is at the bottom. And she talked about how there are multiple fake accounts pretending to be Black women. They have basically studied the Black community. And when I say they, I will get into that more, but they as in troll bots and troll farms. So pretty much when you're speaking with people online, these are not always real people, or they are real people, but they're pretending to be someone else. They're pretending to be Black. There are a lot of fake accounts like this. And she tried to warn people. She said these fake accounts who pretend to be Black women seem to be real people with real concerns. They connect with the American Black community online, attempting to learn Black vernacular and key issue areas. And so when this came out and she was on Joy Reid's show, ADOS said, we're not bots, we're not Russian, we are demanding a Black agenda. And that was in July of 2019, where the whole We Are Not Bots campaign happened, because they were really upset with her talking about the bots and trolls. However, get to December 2019, ADOS is actively blocking these accounts themselves. They're saying 200 people with 0 followers followed me. And Yvette Carnell is here saying that some of those fake accounts were set up by people who want to disrupt under the cover of anonymity. So they eventually came to realize that there are, in fact, bots infiltrating their own movement. And these bots, trolls, and fanatic accounts are created every month. As you can see here, this account on the left for June 2018 was created. And then there's another account recently, June 2020. And sometimes these are dormant accounts that haven't been used for years, but then they just pop up tweeting about ADOS rhetoric. And so, like I said earlier, researchers have been writing about this. There's a recent, not ADOS specifically, but about how the Black trolls are engaging with Black communities online and joining in on these discussions and really manipulating the conversations. And here is one of the most important sections for me, though, is ADOS continues to refute the claims that they are xenophobic, that they attack people. They say that they don't do any of those things, but ADOS leaders really set the tone for xenophobia, online attacks, and harassment. The activist Bree Newsom, who was known for, in South Carolina, climbing the pole and ripping down the Confederate flag. Last year, she said she didn't want to be called ADOS. She had people tweeting her the hashtag, and she said, I don't want to be called that. I want to be called Black American, African American. I don't like the term ADOS. That prompted Yvette Carnell to do a over 2-hour video bashing Bree Newsom. And not just bashing her, but pulling up her wedding photos, pictures of her and her husband, critiquing her from top to bottom, But to pull someone's wedding photos and post them and say that none of this gets us reparations, by the way, but this is the setting the tone for the online attacks among their followers, because this type of behavior is very, very problematic. Why would you, a Black woman, take another Black woman's wedding photos and show them on social media and bash her for over 2 hours because she said she didn't want to be called ADOS? That is very problematic. That is an online attack, and that is a form of harassment and intimidation. And what she said at the end of that video is, you should have never taken down that flag, and you definitely shouldn't have said ADOS and sent the back signal for me. You definitely shouldn't have called for me and Antonio when we didn't call for you. You made a grave mistake. And so now you see the fan accounts retweeting that video, retweeting the wedding images that don't belong to them, and retweeting all of this saying you made a grave mistake, tagging Bree Newsome on all of these posts. This is a form of online harassment, all because she said she didn't want to be called ADOS. There's a pastor that is very active online and very active in the ADOS movement named Kevin Cosby. And he posted a tweet, and this is a part of the xenophobic rhetoric that we're talking about. Native Blacks who are the descendants of slaves have a unique justice claim that excludes people of color, immigrants, minorities, physically challenged, sexual orientation. And when he spelled that out, he spelled out the word pimps. So this pastor is referencing not only people of color, not only immigrants, but people with physical challenges, people with disabilities as pimps. This is part of the ADOS terminology. This is part of their rhetoric that renders them very divisive and hateful online. It's very harmful for a pastor to be saying things like this, to be calling people with disabilities pimps, and to be calling minorities pimps. It is just very disturbing language. And to even point out someone's sexual orientation all over, none of this is getting us reparations. More examples of xenophobia, online attacks, and harassment. So as I said in my report, ADOS accounts do this thing called swarming, especially when they don't like someone or when they're trying to intimidate someone. And so these are some of the xenophobic attacks. And for folks that don't know, xenophobia is fear of immigrant, hatred of immigrant. This is an account, an anonymous ADOS account tweeting Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. Look at that sneaky African Caribbean immigrant masquerading as a native-born Black American Congress member, passing out nasty, unhealthy turkeys. Jackson Lee District is worse now compared to when she arrived. But that wasn't even the worst of it. When Representative Elijah Cummings died, ADOS accounts were attacking him. They were calling him a coon. They were saying Cummings has no legacy with ADOS. He doesn't deserve our sympathy. It was very, very disturbing, but they flooded his account. They were saying, may he rot in hell. When did he fight for us? Like, when did he fight for ADOS? Like he fought for illegal aliens. Under pictures of his wife, they were saying, shut the F up, BITCH. You and your dead husband are collaborators with, I guess they're saying white supremacy to do nothing for us. Blacks, don't be fooled by this anti-Trump rhetoric. Where are the tangibles 2020? And this is under a tribute video. So this is what we talk about when we talk about the hatred and the visceral and the online attacks towards other Black people, other Black Americans especially. And the latest attacks have been targeted at Nicole Hannah-Jones for her 1619 project and for her recent article on reparations. And what's very interesting is when the announcement for this event came out, Yvette Carnell said that I was lying about online violence, that I was that this was a setup, and that they block all bad actors. These people that are harassing Nicole Hannah-Jones on the internet, they're all still followers of Yvette Carnell, and they interact with her account daily. They do extensive doxing. So at one point, there was a woman that was digging up people's criminal histories and posting them online. If they said they didn't like ADOS, she was looking up the business registrations for J.A.M. Mitchell because she didn't like her report. This is the type of stuff that happens online within the ADOS hashtag community, especially on Twitter. Here is ADOS DMV calling J.A.M. Mitchell a digital mammy, all because she wrote a report about bots and trying to warn the Black community about online manipulation. They used weird images of her and looked up her business registration and tried to confront her or get her in trouble with the DC government. It was a lot of different things happened, but to call someone a digital mammy and harass them like this is very disturbing behavior, and it's not something that is foreign to ADOS. They do this every day, and that is why a lot of people do not associate with the group, especially online, once they witness this behavior. But even on a more personal note, again, when I put out this the flyer for this event, they said that I was a liar. But this account in particular said, I might get banned, but who cares? Public service announcements to the ADOS community. If anyone has been blocked by Jessica Aiwuyor, as I have, and have a peaceful, legitimate complaint on the slanderous work that she published, here is her home address to which you can write. And they weren't really trying to get people to write me. They put my home address on the internet for people to confront me in person. And this has also happened before. J.A.M. Mitchell has had someone violently screaming and confronting her in a public space as well. And this account also still follows Yvette Carnell, and the tweet, Twitter made them remove the tweet, but the account is still up. And even as recently as today, an account popped up with guns in the background saying ADOS is my business, tweeting me that I look like a mammy. And this is the kind of behavior that takes place to anyone that does not associate with this group. This is frequent online violence, harassment, and intimidation. So again, is this reparations? No, this is not going to get us any closer to reparations. This is just intimidation. So how does ADOS gain legitimacy if all these things are happening, if there's all these things happening concerning their past and their history and association with the right-wing movement? They gain legitimacy through scholars. So the three pillars of ADOS legitimacy are Dr. Sandy Darity at Duke University, Dr. Cornel West at Harvard University, and Reverend Kevin Cosby at Simmons College of Kentucky. This is the pastor that was calling people with disabilities pimps. Dr. Darity recently published a book called From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. And this is a very important book because it does a really good job of detailing how we were oppressed economically and the definite need for reparations. And it's being shared by in classrooms across the country and among academics. So let's go back. When we talk about the people that are legitimizing this movement, Sandy Darity says that ADOS does not intrinsically require an anti-immigrant posture. And so he says it's not intrinsic. And that was earlier last year. And then later he said, support a group of identity and particular interests of Black descendants of American slavery. ADOS should not and must not mean denigration nor rejection of any other diasporic community. Those who are doing so must stop and apologize. Those who have done so must apologize. But the problem is, it's the ADOS co-founders that are still doing this, and their movement continues to do this. So it's not as if Dr. Darity doesn't know about this. He just, for some reason, chooses to ignore it. And they continue to gain legitimacy through him and his work. In his book, despite ADOS's xenophobia and violent behavior, Darity still promotes them. He says, unexpectedly in 2018, congressional midterm elections were followed by an even greater surge of interest in Black reparations. A movement blossomed in early 2019, on economic network platforms under the label #ADOS, an acronym for American Descendants of Slavery. This digital campaign asserts that Black American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States have a unique and exceptional claim on the nation's government for justice. Coincidence with this emergence of ADOS is the 2020 major party candidates for the presidency engaged seriously with the reparations project for the first time since the Reconstruction era. So even though Darity knows about the hateful actions of what the ADOS group is doing online and has witnessed it for himself, in his book, he says a movement blossomed in 2019. And so it paints this rosy picture of ADOS for readers that might not understand or might not have a full scope. And it really, really, really does not provide a full picture here for what ADOS really is, and it's very disturbing and problematic. And because of this, legitimization of ADOS through the three pillars of ADOS legitimacy, we have some celebrities that see the hashtag, they hear something, somebody tells them about ADOS and they jump on board because they really want to help, but they don't understand the full scope of what's happening either. So we have Jackie Harry saying that I support reparations for ADOS. We have Shaka Khan, who attended an event for Ahmaud Arbery. And in that event, the ADOS group was pushed. And so she started sharing it, trying in good faith to support the Black community, not really knowing the full background of ADOS. So as I mentioned earlier, ADOS leaders are hesitant to start an official organization under American Descendants of Slavery. So what they have said for people to do, which is also very smart and which also helps them spread their ideology, is their Project Takeover. Again, this is not something that they're hiding, but if you don't have all of the bigger picture, you can miss this. So Project Takeover, they're telling their membership, they're telling their followers to join local NAACP chapters, join the Urban League, or they didn't necessarily say join NCOBRA, but people were planning to come to the NCOBRA conference, but COVID-19 happened. So as part of Project Takeover, that is one of the things that they were doing, joining the Black organizations in order to infiltrate them and spread the ADOS ideology. And that way they don't have to take responsibility for the organizations. They just let their members do the work of spreading the ideologies and use already existing Black organizations to do the work for them. Another thing that they're doing is they are creating various coalitions to continue to gain Black buy-in. And the most recent version of this is the National Coalition of Churches for Reparations. And this is an attempt to get the Black church on board. Everyone knows that the Black church is very essential for reaching the Black community. So by having this National Coalition of Churches for Reparations and this ADOS Pastors Town Hall, it gets unsuspecting people again to follow them and join their movement. I need to reiterate that a lot of people that there are a lot of people that support them that really still do not have full information. They just think that they're following a reparations movement. A lot of people may find out later. I've met people that found out later the anti-immigrant sentiments and the divisiveness and kind of separated themselves from the group after that. But this is one of the tactics for getting Black people on board, the overall Black community on board. Moving forward, please understand that this isn't just about ADOS. The digital space is the next battleground for Black minds. And this is only going to continue. It's going to continue because there are other groups that are testing the waters that are going to try to do the same thing. There are other groups that are coming online using digital blackface or troll bot accounts to rev up our community and manipulate us to act in different ways. We must, and it's going to take years really for us to figure out what has really happened here in the last couple of years, not just with ADOS, but online disinformation campaigns and manipulation in general. We also have to remember that disinformation happened during the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, and the Black Lives Matter movement, to the point where people were creating these, bad actors were creating fake Black Lives Matter accounts and getting people to actually physically show up to events behind these accounts. So this type of online interaction is very influential, and it does make an impact on us psychologically. Another thing that we must do is vet speakers concerning reparations. And if you really want to have a reparations event, I implore you, please go to NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, or the National African American Reparations Commission. These are groups that have been working on this for years, and they really are the most seasoned at tackling this from various perspectives, and they have pushed and advanced reparations forward and gotten us this far with HR 40 in Congress. And also recommendations for media that are on this call and that watch this webinar after the fact. Again, for reparations pieces, all of them should include a representative from NCOBRA or NARC. There's no reason why. It's very irresponsible for journalists to write about these topics and not include the leading reparations groups that have been doing this work for a very, very long time. Please go to NCOBRA and NARC. And another recommendation for media is please get approval for longer investigations, because what is happening in the media space, and I know this as a comms person, they have limited time to write about something. So sometimes there's a hot issue, they get approval to write for it, or they get asked to write for it. They have a quick turnaround. Even Farrah Stockman's piece in the New York Times just had a few weeks to really get ready for that. So, but something like this really, really requires more research. And I recommend that any researchers that are interested in this what phenomena of what's happening in the digital space concerning disinformation and concerning this hashtag in particular, to try to do extensive research and get data on the fake accounts, the disinformation, and the online harassment. In conclusion, yes, ADOS is anti-Black. Yes, ADOS is anti-immigrant. Yes, ADOS suppresses Black votes. Yes, ADOS is used for manipulation. Yes, ADOS engages in online violence. Yes, ADOS ideology is negative for the overall Black collective. Finally, in memory of the mother of the modern reparations movement, Audley Queen Mother Moore, yes, somebody has to pay. All of us, we are advocates for reparations. We will get our reparations. America will pay this reparations on the front end or the back end, but somebody has to pay for reparations. But it just won't happen the ADOS way.